Since the Hanoi summit collapsed in late February, denuclearization talks between North Korea and the U.S. have been at an impasse. Despite Seoul and Washington's continued efforts to bring Pyongyang back to the table, the North recently fired short-range missiles, saying it was simply an exercise. To delve deeper into the issues and prospects for denuclearization talks, Arirang TV had a chance to sit down with Ambassador Joseph DeTrani, Washington's former special envoy for six-party talks with North Korea, and the former president of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. Thank you for being with us today, Mr. DeTrani.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's great being here.
Well, firstly, how do you interpret North Korea's recent firing of missiles? And do you consider them a violation of UN resolutions?
Well, they did fire a few missiles and some other projectiles. Very disappointing they did that. Was it a violation of UN Security Council resolutions? I really can't, I don't know. I mean, that's a decision that the UN Security Council would have to make. I think intellectually speaking, having looked at issues like this, I would think it is a violation. But I think with the violation, there may even be consequences. So I think it's important to hear from the United Nations Security Council.
And even within the Trump administration and between its allies, there are different understandings about what this projectile is. Why are we seeing this discrepancy?
For me, that's hard to explain. I think there should be clarity. I think we have national technical means and other means to determine what type of an event it was, or they were, because indeed it was more than one. So there should be clarity. But I think people are being very cautious at this moment now because of the sensitivity in Pyongyang. Indeed, if it's a violation of a Security Council resolution, there may be consequences. And is this the time to be imposing consequences on North Korea, given the failure of the Hanoi summit? So I think correctly so, people are saying, let's look at them. They were short-range missile launches and a few projectiles. Let the UN sort of make a decision, but let's not make too much of it, because we want to resume negotiations. We want to see progress rather than the further sanctions.
Well, you said people would want to be more cautious on the consequences of North Korea's actions. But recently, North Korea's vessel has been held captive by the U.S. government for the first time, and they've actually even charged charges against it. So what's your take on that?
We've gone through a legal procedure which has permitted the U.S. government then to claim the vessel for violations of Security Council resolutions. So, this is hard, I think, for the North Koreans and others to understand. One element of dealing with North Korea is diplomacy, and that's negotiations, and we do that, and we did that with the six-party talks. The other element is elements of legality, law enforcement, the rule of law. So when there is a violation, in this case a violation of Security Council resolutions, there will be consequences. And in this case, it was the seizure, the impoundment, and then the seizure of this North Korean vessel that was in violation of Security Council resolutions. That's procedural. That's almost required. So people would say, how could you commingle the two? We weren't commingle it. One was law enforcement, and one is diplomacy.
Well, but like you said, it seems like North Korea is not getting this two-way approach. And North Korea has expressed a lot of criticism on the U.S. action. Right. So do you think that a U.S. seizure of North Korean vessel would possibly impact the denuclearization talks in a negative way?
Well, that's a very good question. Because we saw with Banco Delta Asia in 2005, where we had a period of a number of months where North Korea was not interested in talking to us, and in fact they did have a nuclear event in 2006. So hopefully this doesn't happen again. Hopefully North Korea, now they've been working with us for over 25 years. They understand this was something that was in the middle, that was moving forward in our legal system, so that by our system of the rule of law, we ensured that we took the vessel only when we had the actual permission to do that.
What's the general consensus amongst American experts and political figures on the current denuclearization talks with the North?
I think there's a lot of skepticism in the United States. A lot of skepticism, a lot of people, and I think understandably so, a lot of people saying we've had 25 years of these negotiations, you know, the agreed framework, the six-party talks with the Leap Day agreement. And now we had our president, the first time a sitting president has met with the head of state from North Korea. And then we have, well, Hanoi was not successful, right? It was a disappointment. But we have now these few missiles launched, and some of the very bad rhetoric coming out of Pyongyang, criticizing our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor. But there are some, and I'm one of the some, who believe we've seen significant progress over the year. I mean, compare it to 2017, when we had missile launches and an intercontinental ballistic missile launched, the Hwasong-15, and a thermonuclear test. We are in a different period right now. With our heads, our leaders are sitting down and saying, let's get this resolved completely and verifiably. And I think there are some, like myself, who are guardedly optimistic we will keep this process moving forward.
Mm-hmm. But these security assurances that North Korea is talking about could possibly include pulling out troops and strategic assets from the region, which could diminish Washington's role and influence over on the East Asia. And so is security guarantee something the U.S. is really willing to discuss and possibly give to the North?
Well, there's no question, security assurances. The U.S. has been willing, and the U.S. is discussing security assurance, normalization of relations. We're prepared to talk about a liaison office and ultimately embassies in our capitals, negative security assurances, etc. Of course, we've been doing all that. You know, in all my years of dealing with North Korean officials, and to include in the six-party talks when we got the joint statement of September 19, 2005, no one has ever mentioned that with complete verifiable denuclearization, the question of the U.S. military presence in the Republic of Korea will be put on the table, or extended nuclear deterrence issues would be put on the table. I hear that from a lot of people who are assuming, and some of those people are kind of negative on, you know, will North Korea ever give up its nuclear weapons? So, no, I'm sorry, that's a bilateral issue with the Republic of Korea. And the same thing with extended nuclear deterrence commitments to the Republic of Korea. These are bilateral issues. I think North Korea understands that. And it's certainly not part of complete verifiable denuclearization.
Well, as far as we know, there haven't been any significant talks or exchanges between Washington and Pyongyang since Hanoi. Now, how can the two sides break the impasse?
That's a very good question. Well, one answer is North Korea can answer the phone when we call them, right? Answer the phone, we'd like to talk to you. The second is we'll send someone in, we'll talk. Look, I think the U.S. has been trying to sit down with North Korea, and this is certainly not a laughing matter. It's a very serious matter. And this is why the Hanoi summit did not succeed. When our lead negotiators can't sit down and talk about the issues, you don't have your heads of state sit down and come up with an agreement. Top-down diplomacy is fine when you talk about the overarching objectives. This is where we want to go. But you then have to look at your lead negotiators to do the heavy lifting, to do the work. Your questions, complete, verifiable, what does that entail? Your questions, security assurances, what are you going to give me to assure my security if I'm giving up my nuclear weapons and my missile delivery systems? These and other issues, economic development assistance and so forth. Sanctions, that was the issue in Hanoi, right? They wanted to lift the sanctions. Are you flexible on sanctions in the United States? Are we going to be sort of crushed by these sanctions even until the end of the process of complete verifiable denuclearization? These are the issues for our negotiators. So without our negotiators meeting to work these issues, my view is we are not going to be successful. I do believe we learned from Hanoi. I mean, North Korea had to go back and do some, analysis of what went wrong in Hanoi. So I do believe they will come out and they will have someone, and I don't know who that someone would be, to meet with Steve Biegun, our representative. But we need to do that. We need to get that going on. We need to continue to have momentum.
Well, Kim Jong-un has set the end of the year as the deadline for the U.S. to change its, quote, gangster-like stance.
Right, gangster-like stance, right.
So do you think there will be another Kim-Trump summit before 2019 is out?
give ultimatums to the United States or anybody, but certainly to the United States. Don't sort of give a deadline like, you have to respond by the end of 2019, or otherwise there will be consequences. However, having said that, we just need to get back. We need to get back as soon as we can. Hopefully there will be a summit before 2020. We have an election in 2020. Hopefully there will be a summit.
Well, small deal, big deal, a comprehensive deal with a phased approach. There have been various scenarios suggested as a solution to North Korea's denuclearization. Now, what do you think is the best way to solve this decades-old issue?
I like to use different terminology. I think we want to have a fair deal, one that permits both sides. In this case, because we're talking about both sides, right? North Korea is not Libya. And I know people mention that. North Korea is not Libya. In my estimation, having worked this issue since 2003, North Korea is just not going to give up their nuclear weapons and say, now I've given it up, now will you be nice to me? It just doesn't happen, right? And we did that with basically the joint statement of 2005. It was actions for actions, commitments for commitments. As they denuclearized, if you will, dismantled facilities, we gave them the security assurances. We gave them the movement towards diplomatic relations, the movement towards economic development assistance, energy assistance. In fact, we created 5 working groups to do all of the above. That's what we need. It's got to be dynamic. It's got to address the needs of all parties on that.
South Korea's role seems to have gotten a little ambiguous in recent months because it initially planned to be a mediator, but North Korea urged Seoul to play a bigger role, a more active role in these talks. And currently, the inter-Korean exchanges seem to have died down along with the silence between Pyongyang and Washington. So what do you suggest the Moon administration do now?
You know, it is disappointing that momentum between North Korea and South Korea has died down, as you said, to some extent. I think North Korea is saying, look, inter-Korean relations, let's sort of put the nuclear discussions on the side here. Let's talk about inter-Korean relations. But I think inter-Korean relations, because of the sanctions and other issues, and because of the focus on complete verifiable denuclearization, sort of brings, I think correctly so, the Republic of Korea and the United States very close together on how we move forward. And I'll focus on complete verifiable denuclearization. So I think there are some in Pyongyang who are probably a little frustrated with that, who are saying, why can't we, just move with inter-Korean relations? And we'll talk to the Americans, but let's just the two of us. I don't think that's, and that's what your president's been ensuring that doesn't happen. I think that's the way to do it, that we have to show North Korea, and we're certainly not hostile, show North Korea we are working as a team here, because this team wants a peaceful, negotiated resolution to the issues, and we're invested in this together. And so why is North Korea behaving that way? I can't give an answer to that. I think when they realize, and I think they know that we are very close allies. And that's not, putting a wedge between the United States and South Korea is not going to happen. Again, some of the issues, like with Kaesong, it touches the sanctions. Why? Because if there's money accrued to North Korea, the concern is it goes into their nuclear and their missile programs, and that's a violation of a Security Council resolution. So, I mean, that's why sanctions are an important part of the equation. And I think that's where North Korea is, that's why we heard them in Hanoi saying you have to lift these post-March 2016 sanctions, because I think they are biting, and it's affecting North Korea's ability to interact with South Korea, but also with China and with other countries.
So now we know that North Korea wasn't as happy as we thought they'd be when South Korea announced its plans to provide food and humanitarian assistance to the North. But despite that, the food shortage in North Korea is likely to get worse, especially with the outbreak of African swine flu recently confirmed. What's your take on that?
So I would have thought North Korea would have been responsive to that. Maybe not say anything, but certainly not criticize it. Again, disappointed with them saying it, but I think we have to understand something, and I think you do, and I think your colleagues in South Korea know it certainly better than we in the United States. that's North Korea sometimes emits. Sometimes they react, and they'll say things, and not because they're impulsive, but they'll say things that to us seem a bit rude, or more than a bit rude, and unnecessary. But I think we have to just push. We shouldn't be overly offended when they say something that's flat out nasty. We should just say, look, it's available, let's go for it, because we're talking about a higher goal here, to provide humanitarian assistance to people who need it. If we are too sensitive and we push back and we say, oh my goodness, that shows they're hostile to us, I think we would be doing our people in South Korea and the United States and the world, but certainly even in North Korea, a disservice. Let's push this aside, let's keep pushing forward. Work the issues and get progress on the issues. And let's not let the talk and some of the invective, nasty rhetoric distract us from our goals.
All right, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time today, Mr.
Thank you.
DeTrani.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Take care.